The first thing Warden Essie Okonkwo noticed about the alien child was that she wasn't afraid. That wasn't supposed to happen. Every other Vithrani dignitary who had passed through the Meridian Transit Hub in the last 11 years had arrived with the same look: the slightly elevated chin, the studied stillness of the eyes, the thinned lips that communicated, without a single word, that every human in the room was approximately as significant as furniture. The Vithrani Empire had held that posture for 400 years of interstellar dominance, and they wore it the way other species wore skin. The girl standing in the center of the arrival atrium wore none of it. She was small, smaller than the escort data file had suggested. Maybe 8 years old in human terms, though Vithrani physiological aging was never a clean translation. She had the Vithrani coloring, that deep iridescent blue-black of deep water under starlight, the secondary eyelids half lowered against the unfamiliar fluorescent panels of the hub's interior. Her ceremonial robes were immaculate, layered silver-gray shimmerweave, with the crescent sigil of the Vithrani royal house stitched at the collar in thread that looked like it cost more than Essie's entire annual salary. She held herself straight, the way they trained royal children to hold themselves from the moment they could walk. But her eyes were moving. They were moving the way a child's eyes move when they've been put somewhere they've never been before, and they're trying to take in everything at once while pretending they aren't looking at anything at all. They tracked the overhead cargo drone making its maintenance pass. They flicked to the 2 human dockworkers on the upper gantry arguing loudly about a load manifest, then to the small food vendor cart near the east gate, where a teenage human girl was eating something on a stick that steamed visibly. They settled for a long moment on the enormous painted mural on the northern wall, the one the Transit Authority had commissioned to mark the first decade of the Meridian Accord, and something in the child's expression shifted, a fraction, like a door opening a crack before catching itself. Essie had been the Transit Hub's child protection liaison for 6 years. She knew what curiosity looked like under suppression. She knew exactly what it cost a child to hold a face still when everything inside them was reaching toward something new. She stepped forward. "Your Highness," she said, in the Vithrani formal register she'd spent 4 months learning specifically for this assignment. "I am Warden Okonkwo. I'll be your custodial escort for the duration of your stay." The child's gaze came to her. The secondary eyelids completed their retraction, and Essie found herself looking into eyes the color of amber shot through with veins of pale gold, a Vithrani trait associated with the highest genetic lines. The imperial court files had listed this child as Princess Avalsara, 3rd of the royal bloodline, temporarily removed from the capital systems during an internal succession dispute that the Vithrani government had communicated with all the warmth and detail of a technical malfunction report. The princess looked at her for exactly 3 seconds. Then she looked past her shoulder at the food cart by the east gate, at the teenage human girl still eating the steaming thing on the stick, and said, in perfectly precise standard galactic common, with an accent like river stones, "What is that?" It was not a question with a rising inflection. It was the declaration of someone who intends to know. "Fried potato spiral," Essie said. "It's a snack food." The princess looked at the potato spiral for another moment. Then she looked back at Essie with the expression of someone filing information away. "I have not eaten since the transition jump," she said. The ship's replicators were calibrated for adult Vithrani physiology. Essie looked at the 6-member Vithrani security escort hovering at the edge of the atrium, all of them radiating the practiced stillness of professional bodyguards who had been told, very clearly, that their charge was not to be humiliated, coddled, or accommodated in any way that would compromise her standing. She looked back at the princess. She looked at the potato spiral. "Would you like to try one?" she said. The Vithrani security lead, a tall male with the rank sash of a senior sentinel, made a sound that communicated volumes. The princess did not look at him. Yes, she said, with the specific gravity of someone who has made a decision and is not revisiting it. That was how Essie Okonkwo ended up standing at a transit hub food cart with a Vithrani royal child, watching her eat an entire fried potato spiral with an expression of concentrated seriousness, while 6 increasingly unhappy bodyguards stood 7 meters away and tried to look like they weren't witnessing this. The princess finished the last curl. She examined the empty stick. That substance is not on our approved nutritional manifests, she said. No, Essie agreed. It was good. Most people think so. The amber eyes came up to hers again. You are not what I was told to expect, the princess said. They told me humans were noisy and imprecise, and that I should not speak to any of you without my escort present. And yet here we are. And yet here we are, the princess agreed, with a seriousness that made the sentence sound like a philosophical position. She turned the empty stick over once in her small fingers. My name is Avalsara. The Your Highness becomes tiresome. Essie, said Essie. Essie, the princess repeated, as if tasting whether the name worked. She seemed to decide it did. The mural on the wall, the tall figures with the spreading hands, what are they reaching for? Essie looked at the mural. The artist had been a human painter from the coastal regions, and she'd filled the northern wall with figures of every species represented in the Meridian Accord, reaching toward a central point of light, hands and appendages and manipulators all extended toward the same place without quite touching. Nothing specific, Essie said. She painted it to represent potential, the idea that we're all reaching toward something we haven't gotten to yet. The princess was quiet for a moment. On our homeworld, she said, we do not make art about reaching, we make art about arriving. What's the difference? Another silence, longer this time. I have been thinking about that, the princess said, since I looked at it. That was the first day. The guest quarters assigned to the Vithrani delegation occupied the hub's eastern residential wing, a section that had been retrofitted at considerable expense with Vithrani atmospheric scrubbers, lighting calibrated to the Vithrani visible spectrum, and furniture constructed to Vithrani ergonomic specifications. The Empire had sent precise requirements. The Transit Authority had fulfilled every one of them. The result was a suite of rooms that looked, to Essie's human eyes, like a very expensive showroom for a culture that associated comfort with restraint. The security escorts settled into their positions. The princess was shown to her rooms. Essie was assigned the connecting quarters, which was protocol for child protection liaisons in cross-species diplomatic transit, and which meant that at 3:40 hours on the first night, she was woken by a sound that took her approximately 4 seconds to identify as deliberate, controlled movement. She was on her feet before her conscious mind fully came online. 6 years of the job had hardwired certain responses. The connecting door was ajar. Essie pushed it open. The princess was standing in the center of her room in the dark, in her sleeping robe, facing the window that overlooked the hub's interior concourse. The overnight skeleton crew moved below, a few maintenance workers, the night shift customs officers, a pair of dock workers playing cards at a table near the cargo bay entrance. Small human life, undramatic and ordinary. The princess was watching them. She didn't startle when Essie appeared in the doorway. She said without turning, "Do they always do that, at this hour?" "Work the night shift," Essie said. "Yes." "Not the work," a pause, "the cards, the way the one on the left laughs at what the other one says." "Yes," Essie said after a moment. "They've been playing cards together on night shift for years, those two. I've walked past them 100 times. They like each other." "They do." "It shows," the princess said, with something careful in her voice, like she was holding a new piece of information gently while she decided where it fit. "The members of my escort, they are loyal to me. That is not the same thing." Essie crossed the room and stood beside her at the window. Below, The one on the left, Marcus. She knew his name. He'd been working cargo intake since before she arrived, made a gesture with his cards that made the other one tip his head back and laugh. A small, genuine sound that drifted up faintly through the window glass. No, Essie agreed, it's not the same thing. I have never had anyone who liked me, the princess said. I have had people who were loyal to my position. It is a very different thing, and I have spent considerable time thinking about the difference. Essie said nothing, because there was nothing to say to that which would not be either a platitude or a diminishment. You should go back to sleep, the princess said, still watching the card game below. I am not in danger. I am only unable to stop looking at things. I know the feeling, Essie said. A very small pause, do you? When I first got this job, Essie said, I worked a 6-month posting on a Dreshali habitat station. Every night for 6 months I watched the Dreshali children through the observation panels doing their evening song cycles, and every night I couldn't go to sleep until they finished. Something about it. The way they all moved together without any of them being in charge of it. The princess was quiet for a long moment. What is it like, she said finally, to watch something and feel that you want to be part of it? It was very nearly not a question. Complicated, Essie said honestly, but usually worth it. It was on the 3rd day that the mechanical entity made itself known. Essie had been escorting the princess through the hub's botanical greenhouse wing, a concession to the transit authority's belief that all visiting dignitaries benefited from a scheduled exposure to something that grew, when she noticed the shape under the princess's ceremonial robe. A small movement near the right hip, like something adjusting its position. She stopped walking. The princess stopped too and looked at her with an expression of precise, contained something. Avalsara, Essie said, keeping her voice as neutral as she could manage. Is there something under your robe? The princess appeared to be doing a calculation. The kind of calculation that involves weighing whether honesty is more or less costly than misdirection, and arriving at a reluctant conclusion. Yes, she said. Is it? It is not dangerous, the princess said. To you, I have been very careful to ensure that. The shimmer weave shifted. From somewhere near the princess's hip, a small appendage emerged, mechanical in nature, articulated in 3 segments, moving with the tentative quality of something that is uncertain whether it is about to be welcomed or removed. It was the size of a human child's hand. Its surface was a deep iridescent blue-black, the same shade as the princess's own coloring, though whether that was natural or adaptive Essie couldn't immediately tell. At its terminal joint, what might have been fingers, or a reasonable facsimile of fingers slowly extended, 4 of them, feeling the greenhouse air. His name is Cadden, the princess said, or that is what I call him. He does not use sound to communicate his name. I inferred it from his identification signal. The small mechanical thing, Cadden, turned its terminal joint toward Essie. The 4 finger shape spread slightly and held still. It was very clearly looking at her, through some sensory apparatus she couldn't identify. He's one of the Vekrin, Essie said slowly. The dimensional beings. The ones whose existence had been first formally documented 11 years ago, who had crossed from their home dimension to find life energy and ended up partnering with organic hosts to survive. She'd read the briefings. Most Vekrin partners were adults, usually military or scientific personnel. She'd never encountered one partnered with a child. He was in transit between partners, the princess said. His previous host died in the succession conflict. He found me when I was in the palace infirmary after the evacuation. A pause so brief Essie almost missed it. I was alone and he was alone and he asked me. In his way, he asked. He asked, Essie said. He was very frightened, the princess said, with the matter-of-fact steadiness of a child who knows exactly what fear looks like because they have felt it themselves. He is very small and he had traveled a very long way and he lost the person who was supposed to take care of him. So I said yes. Essie looked at the small mechanical entity hovering at the edge of the princess's robe, four finger shapes still extended toward her with an air of patient evaluation. She thought about the briefings. She thought about Vecran biology, the fact that they needed an emotional resonance from their host to function, a kind of warmth that sustained them the way fuel sustained an engine. She thought about what it meant that this one had chosen a royal child who had just been told she was being removed from her home for an indefinite period, during a political crisis, with no one who liked her. "Hello, Cadden," she said. The four finger shapes curled slightly inward, then extended again. It was, unmistakably, a gesture of acknowledgement. "He says you smell like someone who keeps their word," the princess said. And then, precisely, "I do not know how he can tell that, but he is rarely wrong about people." The Vithrani security lead's name was Kethros, and he became aware of Cadden on the fourth day. It did not go well. Essie heard the exchange through the connecting door, the clipped, formal Vithrani of a military officer informing a royal child that unauthorized dimensional entities were a security risk, a political liability, and categorically in violation of the terms under which the princess had been transported. She heard the princess respond in the same register, with the calm precision of someone who had learned from an early age to argue without raising their voice. She heard Kethros deploy the phrase non-negotiable in 3 consecutive sentences. She heard the princess say, in a tone that was very quiet and very final, "He asked me, when I was alone and no one else was there. He asked, and I said yes. That is not a thing I am willing to undo." Then she heard nothing, which meant the argument had reached a standoff. Essie opened the connecting door. Kethros turned. He was a large Vithrani male in the middle years, with the build of someone who had spent decades in protective service and the face of someone who had learned to carry complications without showing them. He looked at Essie with the expression of a person who is about to explain why her involvement is neither required nor welcome. "The Vecran entity is registered with the Planetary Medical Authority as a partner organism," Essie said before he could speak. "Under the Meridian Accord Subarticle 12, registered partner organisms fall under the same protections as medical equipment. They cannot be removed from their host without both host consent and medical clearance. She's the host. She has not consented. Do you have medical clearance?" A silence. "I can pull the subarticle text if you need it," Essie said pleasantly. Kethros looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man who is being very professional about the fact that he would like to say several things he has decided not to say. He looked at the princess, who was watching him with the specific tranquility of someone who is waiting to see if the adults are going to get this right. He looked at the small mechanical shape tucked against the princess's side, which appeared to be maintaining a deliberate stillness in the way that a small creature maintains a deliberate stillness when it understands that the outcome of the current situation matters. "I will require written documentation of that subarticle," Kethros said. "I'll have it on your comm by end of hour," Essie said. He left without another word. The princess watched him go. Then she looked at Essie, and something in the amber eyes shifted, a very small unlocking, like a window opened a fraction in a room that had been sealed for a long time. Cadden's 4 finger shapes emerged from beneath the robe and curled once, slowly, toward Essie. "He says you kept your word," the princess said. "I try to," Essie said. "I know," said Avulsora. "I have been watching." There was a protocol crisis on day 7. It began, as most crises at the Meridian Transit Hub began, as a bureaucratic inconvenience, and became something more serious before anyone had time to prepare. A Vithrani political faction, not the one that had evacuated the princess, but the opposing one, the one currently holding the actual levers of imperial power, had filed a formal intervention claim with the hub's administrative authority, arguing that the princess's transport arrangements had been made without proper authorization, and that her custody should be transferred immediately to their designated representative, who was, it turned out, already in transit to the hub. Essie found out about it at 6:15 from the hub administrator, a compact woman named Director Vassell, who communicated facts with the efficiency of someone who considers emotional context a distraction from problem solving. The representative arrives in 4 hours, Vassell said. They filed a preemptive override of the Meridian Accord subarticles regarding partner organisms and child protective status. They can't override subarticle 12, Essie said. They're contesting whether the entity qualifies as a registered partner organism versus an unregistered dimensional parasite, which would put it under the security exclusion clause instead. Cadden is, Essie stopped. She thought carefully. Who filed the original partner registration? There is no original partner registration, Vassell said. The bond formed during an emergency evacuation. The paperwork doesn't exist. In 4 hours, Essie did the math of what was available to her and what wasn't, and then she did the math of what she actually intended to do regardless. I need medical bay access, she said, and I need Dr. Fenwick. Dr. Yusuf Fenwick was the hub's resident veteran biology specialist, a tall, slightly disheveled man who had spent 30 years studying dimensional entities and had, over that time, developed the characteristic appearance of someone who finds the universe interesting enough that things like haircuts and regular mealtimes become lower priority. He had also, Essie happened to know, published the foundational paper on emergency partner bond formation that had eventually become the basis for subarticle 12. He met her in the medical bay at 6:40 with coffee in one hand and a data tablet in the other. Partner registration, Essie said. Emergency formation. I need it filed and certified before the opposition representative lands. Fenwick looked at his tablet. He looked at Essie. He looked past her shoulder at the princess, who had arrived quietly in the medical bay doorway with Cadden fully visible now, clinging to her shoulder with 2 articulated limbs while the other 2 held forward in that gesture of patient attention. Fenwick's expression went through several stages very quickly. He set his coffee down. How long has the bond been active? He asked. 9 days, the princess said from the doorway. He chose me on the 9th day of the evacuation crisis. I have been monitoring his arbitrium intake, and he is stable. Fenwick looked at the small mechanical entity on her shoulder with the expression of a man in the presence of something scientifically remarkable. You've been monitoring his arbitrium intake. The veteran partner requirements are in the public medical literature, the princess said. I read them the first night. I adjusted my sleep schedule to maintain consistent emotional resonance generation during his recovery phase. He had been in transit for a significant period before he found me, and his reserves were low. A silence. She adjusted her sleep schedule, Fenwick said to Essie. Yes, Essie said. How old is she? 8 approximately. Fenwick looked at the princess again. Cadden made a movement with his forward limbs that looked, somehow, like agreement with whatever Fenwick was thinking. Come in, Fenwick said to the princess, and pulled out a diagnostic scanner. Let's make this official. The certification took 2 hours and 40 minutes. It involved 3 physical examinations, a bond resonance mapping test, a legal attestation from Fenwick, and an emergency filing routed through 2 layers of Meridian Accord administrative oversight. By the time the opposition faction's representative, a tall Vithrani official named Honored Delegate Morth, who arrived with 4 aides and an expression of prepared displeasure, reached the hub's administrative reception, the registration was filed, certified, and already in the system. Essie was standing in the reception corridor when Morth arrived. She handed him the documentation before he had time to open his prepared statement. He read it, His face went through a controlled rearrangement of expressions, each one more contained than the last, in the way of someone who has trained extensively to not show exactly what they are feeling. The entity designation as a registered partner organism, he said, does not change the question of the princess's custody. No, Essie agreed. But it does change what you're allowed to do with her partner while that question is being resolved through official channels, which, at current administrative processing speeds, will take approximately 14 to 21 standard days. Another rearrangement of expression. You are aware, he said, with the precision of someone making a point, that this child is Vithrani, that she is a subject of imperial law, that the jurisdiction of the meridian accords child protective provisions extends only to the duration of transit, and that her transit status is precisely what is being contested. I'm aware, Essie said. I'm also aware that under Article 4 of the General Diplomatic Provisions, any custody dispute involving a minor aboard a neutral transit facility requires a hearing before a multi-species arbitration panel before any custodial transfer can be executed. I filed for that hearing this morning. It's scheduled for day 11. Morth looked at her for a long, measured moment. You are very determined, he said. I have a job, Essie said. Your job, Morth said, with the careful enunciation of someone delivering a message they've been authorized to deliver, does not extend to interfering in Vithrani internal matters. My job, Essie said with equal care, extends to ensuring that no child in this facility is removed from protective custody without due process, regardless of species designation. That's it. That's the whole job, and I'm good at it. She left him in the corridor with his documentation and his 4 aides and his prepared displeasure, and went back to the medical bay, where the princess was sitting on an examination table watching Fenwick show her a holographic model of a Vecran bond resonance map, with the focused attention of someone who intends to understand everything she's being shown. Cadden was on the table beside her. He had, at some point in the last 20 minutes, extended one of his articulated limbs and rested it very lightly against the back of the princess's hand, which was resting on the table beside him. Essie stopped in the doorway and looked at them, the mechanical entity resting its limb against the child's hand, the child not moving her hand away, Fenwick tracing the resonance map with one finger, while he explained terminology to a small royal, who was asking questions with the dedicated seriousness of someone who has decided this matters to her. She thought about the mural on the northern wall, all those figures reaching toward a central point they hadn't gotten to yet. She thought about what the princess had said on the first day. We make art about arriving. Maybe, she thought, arriving and reaching weren't as different as they sounded. The arbitration panel convened on day 11, and it was complicated. Not because the legal arguments were unclear. They weren't, or at least Essie's were as clear as she could make them. But because legal arguments in multi-species arbitration had to accommodate the reality that 3 of the 5 panel members came from cultures with substantially different foundational assumptions about what childhood was and what it meant to protect it. And one of those panel members, a Relathi elder named Consular Dreen, had a philosophical framework regarding royal children that involved a great deal of emphasis on duty and lineage, and very little on anything that might rhyme with the word preference. The hearing ran for 6 hours. Kethros testified that the Vecran entity represented an unvetted security risk. Morth's legal attaché argued that the princess's expressed wishes were legally subordinate to imperial policy. Fenwick testified with considerable precision about the nature of Vecran partner bonds and the documented medical consequences of forced separation in the early bonding phase. The panel's human member, a soft-spoken legal scholar from the northern continent named Mediator Zhao, asked careful, sharp questions that cut to the center of things, and then retreated behind neutrality. The princess was not supposed to testify. Royal children in diplomatic transit were, under both Vthrani custom and Accord protocol, represented by their designated advocates rather than speaking for themselves. On hour 5, Consular Dreen said something that translated approximately as, "The child's attachment to the entity reflects a developmental phase of emotional imprecision that will be corrected by appropriate imperial instruction." The room went quiet. Essie was writing a note for her cross-examination when she registered the quality of the quiet and looked up. The princess had stood up from her designated seat. She was very small in the hearing chamber, which had been sized for adult diplomats. She held herself straight, the way they had trained her to hold herself, in the way that had nothing to do with being frightened, because she wasn't. "With respect to the consular," she said, in galactic common in a voice that was entirely steady, "I am not imprecise. I read the partner bond literature in a single night. I adjusted my rest cycles to maintain his arbitrium intake during his recovery. I have monitored his resonance levels every morning and evening for 9 days. If that is imprecision, I am interested to hear what precision looks like." A silence of approximately 5 seconds. "I found him alone," she said. "He found me alone. He asked in the way that he asks, and I understood what he was asking. I said yes because I chose to, not because I was confused or developmental or incorrect." A breath, small and controlled. "I said yes because no one had asked me anything in a very long time, and because he needed someone to say yes." The chamber was very quiet. "I am a royal child of the Vthrani Empire," the princess said. "I am also a child who was alone in an infirmary and did not know what was going to happen to her. Both of these things are true. I would like the panel to consider that they are both true." She sat down. Cadden, tucked against her shoulder, made no movement, but the 2 forward limbs extended slightly and held, in that gesture of patient attention that Essie had come to read by now as something like pride. Outside the hearing chamber, while Essie waited for the panel to re-enter after their recess, Kethros appeared beside her. He did not sit. He stood in the way that career security personnel stood, weight balanced, hands loose at his sides, gaze making its habitual sweep of the room for things that shouldn't be there before settling into a watchful stillness. He had been doing that sweep every few minutes for the 11 days of the princess's transit, and Essie had stopped registering it as anything other than background, the way you stop registering the sound of ventilation once you've been in a building long enough. "The legal subarticle argument," he said without looking at her. "When I came for the entity, subarticle 12. "Yes," Essie said. "Was it accurate?" "Completely." A pause. "I did not know about it." "Most people don't," Essie said. "It was added in the Accord's 4th revision, buried in the partner organism protections." Another pause, the kind with something happening inside it. "The Kagami Group, the entity's previous affiliated handlers, they have specific legal instruments they use to contest partner bonds." I was aware of those instruments. A slight shift of weight, almost imperceptible. I was given a briefing before departure on how to use those instruments if the princess formed an unsanctioned bond. Essie was quiet. "The briefing did not mention subarticle 12, Kethros said. "No," Essie said. "I imagine it didn't." "I do not know," Kethros said, with the precision of a man choosing exactly the words he means, "whether that omission was deliberate or simply an incomplete preparation. I have been considering it." He was still watching the room with the habitual sweep. "I have been considering several things." Essie let the silence stand for a moment. Outside the chamber's elevated windows, a cargo drone completed its maintenance pass and banked toward the bay. A morning shift worker in transit authority coveralls wheeled a parts cart along the lower concourse, moving with the unhurried pace of someone mid-task who knows where they are going. She read the partner organism medical literature in a single night, Essie said, adjusted her rest cycles, monitored his arbitrium intake every morning and evening. I was aware, Kethro said. Before I filed the subarticle argument, you were aware. A very small pause. Yes. Why didn't you report it to the Kagami Group representative before I filed? The pause this time was longer. Kethros watched the cargo drone disappear behind the bay doors. There are things, he said finally, that I have been loyal to for 22 years. The safety of the princess, the integrity of my service, the instruction of my employer. Another pause. When those things are the same, there is no difficulty. When they are not, he stopped, considered. When they are not, it is a question of which one is actually the foundation. He said nothing else. He had said, Essie understood, exactly as much as he intended to say. For what it's worth, Essie said, I think she knows. She notices everything, Kethro said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite what he usually sounded like. Something worn smooth by the specific friction of a realization arriving late. She always has. I told myself it was a function of her training, the observational requirements of royal education. It is not only that. A pause. She is paying attention in a different way. She has always been paying attention in a different way. He made the habitual sweep of the room one more time, and then he looked at Essie directly, briefly, and said, the subarticle argument was well constructed. Thank you, Essie said. I do not say that to be polite. I know, Essie said. Neither of us has wasted much time on politeness. Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to the concept. He returned his gaze to the room. They stood together in the way of two people who have ended up on the same side of something without either of them having planned it, which is sometimes the most stable configuration there is. The panel deliberated for 3 hours. In the waiting area outside the hearing chamber, Essie sat with the princess on a bench along the curved wall, watching the hub's afternoon movement below through the elevated windows. The food cart was there, a different teenager working it today, but the same cart. Cargo drones made their passes overhead. 2 engineers in maintenance coveralls were having a conversation near the east gantry that involved a great deal of hand-waving. The princess watched all of it. If they decide against us, she said very quietly, what happens? I appeal to the next level of accord arbitration, Essie said. That buys us another 20 days approximately. And after 20 days, I find the next level after that. The princess was quiet for a moment. How many levels are there? Technically, Essie said, quite a few. The accord is a very large document. Another moment of quiet. Cadden had settled himself against the princess's collarbone with a stillness that communicated something like exhaustion, and the princess had her left hand raised to her shoulder, fingers resting very gently near him without quite touching him, in the way a child holds their hand near something fragile. Essie, the princess said. Yes. When the succession crisis ends, when there is a resolution and I can return to the empire, things will be different again. I will be in the palace systems, and there will be protocols and official functions, and there will not be food carts and card games at night, and doctors who sit with you while you watch a hologram. Essie said nothing. It was true, and saying it wasn't true wouldn't help her. I will remember all of it, the princess said. I need you to know that I will remember all of it. I know, Essie said. And Cadden will remember it. A pause. He remembers everything his partners have shown him. He told me in his way that I am showing him things he has not seen before, things from my side. She glanced at Essie, sidelong, amber eyes steady. He says humans show him things that are different. That there is something humans do with the small moments, the card games and the potato spirals, and the hand resting near the fragile thing without touching it. That is different from what other species do. What does he say the difference is? The princess was quiet for a moment that felt like actual thought, the kind that goes somewhere before it stops. He says, she said slowly, that other species experience the small moments. Humans appear to collect them, save them, to build something out of them that they keep. She tilted her head very slightly, still looking at the movement below. He says he has been across several host partners and in several dimensions, and he has not encountered another species that does that. He finds it a pause, and the ghost of something that might have been a smile moved across her face, careful and quick as a bird landing. He says he finds it very strange and very good. Essie sat with that for a moment. Tell him, she said, that that's just what we do, we don't know how else to be. Cadden's 4 limbs opened slowly and held in the warm, still air of the waiting area, extended outward in a gesture Essie had not seen from him before, all 4 at once, reaching outward, like something unfurling. The princess watched him do it. Something in her face settled, very quietly, into a new arrangement, like a door that had been held open by effort for a long time finally resting open on its own. Neither do we, she said. Now. The panel's decision came at the end of the 3rd hour, delivered by mediator Zhao with the careful, precise neutrality of someone who has read every word of a large document and is now going to use it. The decision ran to 11 points. Essie listened to all of them. The summary, translated through the layered formality of Accord legal language, was this. The Vecran partner bond, certified and registered, constituted a medical dependency relationship under the Accord's partner protection provisions. The princess, as the bonded host, was the legal decision-maker regarding the bond's continuity. Any custodial transfer that would disrupt the bond required her consent, which she had indicated she would not give. The panel declined to override that position on the grounds advanced by Delegate Morth, as those grounds were insufficient to meet the threshold for overriding host medical consent under current Accord provisions. The custody dispute itself, regarding the succession-related question of which Vithrani authority had legitimate claim to the princess's guardianship, was outside the panel's jurisdiction and referred to the appropriate Accord diplomatic channels. The princess remained in Meridian Transit Hub, protective custody pending resolution. Morth's legal attaché said something very controlled and very unhappy in clipped Vithrani official register. Morth himself said nothing, which was its own kind of communication. Kethros, on the other side of the chamber, was looking at the princess with an expression that Essie had not seen on him before. She filed it away and said nothing about it. On the evening of the decision day, Fenwick found Essie in the staff break room at the end of her shift, making tea with the focused inattention of someone doing something routine, while their mind is somewhere else entirely. He set his data tablet on the table and sat down across from her. He had the look of a man who has been writing notes and has reached the point where the notes have become insufficient. I've been trying to characterize what Cadden is doing, he said, without preamble, in the way of a scientist who doesn't have time for preamble because the interesting thing is already happening. The arbitrium, Essie said. The arbitrium, yes. He pulled up the tablet and turned it to face her. The resonance map from Cadden's first examination was on one side of a split display. A map from his most recent scan was on the other. Essie was not a Vecran biologist, but even she could see that the 2 patterns were different. The first was sparse, the way something is sparse after a long journey with insufficient supply. The second was, she searched for the right word. It's fuller, she said. It is substantially fuller, yes. Fenwick tapped the second map. In 22 days, that is not a normal recovery trajectory. Partner bonds typically take months to reach this level of resonance density, and that's under optimal conditions, stable host, established environment, regular low-stress integration. This one formed under the worst possible conditions. Evacuation crisis, transit stress, legal threat to the bond itself, an uncertain host who had never partnered before. So what's driving the recovery? Essie said. Fenwick looked at the map for a moment with the expression of a scientist who has a theory and is trying to decide how far out on the branch to go. The prevailing model for Vecrin arbitrium absorption, he said, is that it's a passive process. The host generates the resonance as a byproduct of emotional activity, and the entity absorbs it. The host is the source, the entity receives. But, as he said, but the bond resonance in this case has a quality I've only seen described once in the literature, in a paper from about 40 years ago that most of the field considers a methodological outlier. He pulled up the paper on the tablet. It had the slightly yellowed digital appearance of something scanned from a physical document. The paper describes what the author called a reflective resonance loop, where the entity's own emotional responses begin to generate secondary arbitrium that feeds back into the bond. The host and the entity both become sources. The system becomes self-sustaining in a way that standard bonds don't. Essie looked at the resonance maps. She thought about the sound Cadden had made in the waiting area, the one that went through the sternum like a plucked string. He was generating it, she said, when he made that sound. Fenwick's expression did its thing. I believe so, yes. He closed the tablet cover. The paper's author speculated that the reflective resonance loop required a specific condition to form, that the host and entity had to each experience something they hadn't experienced before through the bond, not just comfort or safety, something genuinely new. What's her something new? Essie said. Someone fighting for her, Fenwick said simply. Not for her position, not for imperial protocol, for her specifically because she had done something right and it was worth protecting. He looked at the tablet. What's his? Essie thought about the princess describing it. The way humans collect the small moments, build something out of them, keep them. Something he hadn't seen in other species. Belonging, she said. Somewhere he actually belongs. Fenwick nodded slowly, the nod of someone arriving at a conclusion that has been assembling itself for a while. 40-year-old outlier paper, he said. I'm going to have a very interesting response to write. Write it, Essie said. Write every word of it. The days after the decision had a different quality. Slower in some ways. The urgent machinery of the legal crisis wound down into the steady background noise of an ongoing diplomatic process, something that would resolve in its own time through channels Essie had done her part to protect. The daily escort schedule continued. The greenhouse visits continued. The food cart visits became, in an unspoken way, a fixed point in the afternoon, Essie and the princess at the East Gate vendor, and Cadden either tucked under the robe or openly on the princess's shoulder, depending on whether they expected scrutiny, eating things that weren't on any approved nutritional manifest. The card game continued at 3:40 most nights, and the princess continued to watch it, and gradually she stopped being awake when Essie checked the connecting room at 3:40 because she was sleeping better, and Essie noted this the way she noted all progress, quietly, without announcement, as a fact that had earned its place. On day 14, the teenager working the East Gate food cart asked the princess what she was. Not rudely, with the direct curiosity of a 17-year-old who had seen many strange things come through the hub's gates and had developed a pragmatic approach to all of them. She looked at Avalsara, who was examining a new item on the day's menu, a pressed grain spiral with a soft filling that steamed slightly, and she said, "Are you one of the Vithrani, from the delegation?" "Yes," the princess said, without looking up from the menu. "I heard there was a kid in the delegation." The teenager leaned on the cart. She had the easy comfort of someone who spends most of their day talking to strangers and has long since stopped finding it difficult. "You're smaller than I thought." "I'm Dara, by the way." The princess looked up from the menu. "Avalsara," she said. "Cool name." Dara pointed at Cadden, who was on the princess's shoulder and regarding her with the characteristic attention of all four limbs extended. "And that is, what is that?" His name is Cadden, the princess said. He is a veteran partner organism. He is very intelligent and somewhat particular about people. Cadden's 4 limbs held their extended position, evaluating. Does he like people? Dara said. He is deciding, the princess said, with a seriousness that was also, very slightly, something else. He takes approximately 90 seconds. They waited. The cart hummed. At 87 seconds, Cadden extended one limb toward Dara and held it there. Dara, to her credit, extended a finger back. Cadden's finger shapes rested against it, brief and definite. Cool, Dara said, with the equanimity of the young. The princess looked at Essie. She smells like someone who means what she says, she said. I'm starting to understand his methodology, Essie said. What would you like today? Dara said, and the ordinary afternoon continued. On day 17, Kethros appeared in the botanical greenhouse, while Essie and the princess were doing their morning walk through the corridor of low-gravity Tellan orchids. He stood at the edge of the path, with an expression Essie had finally categorized as discomfort of the specific variety produced by a person who has changed their mind about something, and is not entirely comfortable with that fact. The princess noticed him and stopped. They looked at each other for a moment. The senior Vithrani security officer and the small royal child in her shimmer-weave robe with a mechanical entity perched on her shoulder. Kethros said, in formal Vithrani, I did not conduct myself as I should have, regarding the entity. The princess was very still. I was given instructions, he said, regarding what you were and were not permitted to have. I followed those instructions without fully, he paused, without fully considering whether they were correct. Another pause, even shorter. The entity, Cadden, he is stable. He is stable, the princess agreed. Good, Kethros said. And then, with the carefulness of someone doing something they are unfamiliar with, that is good. He left the path the way he had arrived, with the bearing of a professional who does not revisit completed actions. The princess watched him go. Then she looked at Cadden, who was watching her. He has worked for my family for 22 years, she said. He has excellent reflexes, and he always stands slightly to the left of where attacks come from because his dominant side is slower. Noted, Essie said. He has never apologized to me before. The princess paused, for anything. How does it feel? Essie asked. The amber eyes came to hers, thoughtful and unhurried. Like arriving, the princess said. Like the kind of art we make. Cadden made a sound that neither of them had heard from him before, a small, brief resonance that went directly through the sternum like a plucked string. It faded quickly, but the air still felt slightly different after it, the way a room feels different after a window is opened. I didn't know he could do that, Essie said. Neither did I, said the princess. She touched 2 fingers very gently to the side of his main body. He leaned into the contact, minute and definite. He says it is something he learned from me, from a careful translation pause. From watching me decide that someone had earned something. They walked on through the low-gravity orchids, the princess and her warden and the small mechanical entity who had crossed a dimensional boundary looking for somewhere to belong, and had asked a small royal child alone in an infirmary whether he could stay. The Tellan orchids drifted slightly in the recycled air. The overhead grow lights shifted color by a degree Essie's eyes registered only at the edge of attention. The succession crisis resolved on day 23. It resolved not in the way crises usually resolve, with a decisive moment and a clear winner, but in the way political crises among ancient empires often resolve, through an arrangement negotiated by people who were tired, in a backroom process that left both sides with enough to call a partial victory. The faction that had sent Morth agreed to withdraw its custody claim. The faction that had originally evacuated the princess agreed to allow her return under expanded terms that, buried in the 4th subclause of the 6th annex of the agreement, included explicit protection for established veteran-partner bonds. Essie read that subclause 3 times to make sure she had it right. She went to find the princess. Avulsora was in the medical bay. Not for examination. Fenwick had finished his official documentation weeks ago. She was there because she came there most afternoons now, sitting on the same examination table, watching Fenwick work at his research station while she worked at the data tablet the transit authority had assigned her, reading whatever she decided to read next. Today, Essie could see from the doorway, it appeared to be early Accord legislative history. Cadden was beside her, his 4 limbs arranged comfortably around the data tablet, occasionally making the slight adjustments of a creature who has gotten comfortable somewhere and intends to stay. Essie stood in the doorway for a moment and looked at them. The small royal child reading Accord legislative history, the mechanical entity settled comfortably beside her, the disheveled specialist working at his station with a mug of cold coffee at his elbow. And she felt something that she would later, when she wrote her case report, describe as a satisfactory resolution, because that was the professional language and it was accurate. In the moment, it felt more like the image in the mural, figures reaching toward a common point and finding, when they arrived, that the point had moved in the best possible direction. "The crisis is over," she said. The princess looked up. Cadden's 4 limbs opened slightly. "The annex protects him," Essie said, "by name. Cadden, registered partner organism, traveling under host consent. It's in the agreement." The princess was quiet for a moment that was long enough to contain something. "Someone made sure it was in the agreement," she said. "Several someones," Essie said. "Fenwick drafted the language. Mediator Zhao pushed it into the annex. Kethros, and I say this with appropriate surprise, filed a supporting attestation from the security side." Another moment of quiet. Cadden made a small movement, a slight curl of all 4 limbs inward and then outward, which Essie had come to understand was his version of a deep breath. "When do I leave?" the princess asked. 3 days. A Vithrani diplomatic transport is being arranged." Avulsora looked at the data tablet in her hands. She looked at Cadden. She looked at the overhead grow lights through the medical bay's upper window, the ones that shifted color at the edge of attention. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Ask." The thing Cadden said about how humans collect the small moments. She chose her words with care. "He says he has felt it change since he has been here. The quality of what I generate for him, the arbitrium, he says it is more than it was." She looked up. "He says it is because of what I have been collecting." Essie waited. "I want to know," the princess said, "if that is something I can keep when I go back." "Yes," Essie said. "That is something you keep." The amber eyes held hers, level and careful, and underneath the carefulness, something that had not been there when the child had stood in the arrival atrium 23 days ago with the practiced stillness of a royal child who had learned not to want things. "I think," Avulsora said slowly, "that I understand the mural now." "What does it mean?" Essie asked. The princess looked at the door through it, out in the direction of the northern wall where the painted figures still reached toward their common point in colors the artist had chosen for their warmth. "It means," she said, "that you do not have to arrive to belong to the reaching." A pause, precise as always, considered as always. "It means that what you do while you are still reaching is also the thing." Cadden made the sound again, the one that went through the sternum like a plucked string. It was slightly longer this time, and slightly richer, and it filled the medical bay the way warmth fills a room when someone opens an inner door. Fenwick looked up from his research station. He looked at the entity. He looked at the princess. He looked at Essie. His expression did the thing it did when he encountered something the literature had not yet found adequate language for. He picked up a stylus. He started writing. On the morning of the 26th day, the diplomatic transport docked at Bay 7. Essie walked the princess to the gate. Kethros and his escort formed up at a respectful distance. Fenwick came from the medical bay. Director Vassal appeared from administration and stood, compact and practical, at the edge of the gathering in the way of someone who will not claim sentiment, but will also not be absent from the moment. The princess was in her ceremonial robes. Cadden was openly on her shoulder, 4 limbs arranged with a settled confidence that had not been there 26 days ago. He had, Essie noticed, adjusted the precise blue-black of his surface very slightly since the first day, a barely perceptible shift toward a warmer register, the way a color shifts when the light that falls on it changes. At the gate, the princess turned. She looked at Fenwick first, and said something in formal Vithrani that Essie's translation picked up as a very precise and technical thank you that also somehow conveyed that she intended to read everything he'd ever published. Fenwick looked like he might cry, which he would later deny. She looked at Vassal and said, in galactic common, "Your mural is the best thing in this building." Vassal, who had commissioned the mural over 3 rounds of administrative objection and funded it partly from her own discretionary budget, made an expression that she would also later deny. She looked at Kethros for a moment. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything, and somehow that was complete. Then she looked at Essie. "I was told," the princess said, "before I arrived, that humans were noisy and imprecise, and that I should not speak to any of you without my escort present." "I remember," Essie said. "I have been thinking," said Avalsora, "about what I would say to the person who told me that." A pause, selected like a careful word. "I think I would tell them that imprecision in humans is sometimes the name for a kind of attention that precision cannot reach, and that noisiness is sometimes what it sounds like when a species is paying that attention to everything at once." She held out her hand, an unusual gesture for a Vithrani royal, a human gesture learned and chosen. Essie took it. Cadden extended 2 of his 4 limbs toward her as well, and she held her other hand out and let them rest there, 4 small, articulated finger shapes resting against her palm with a weight like trust and a warmth like belonging. "You kept your word," the princess said, "many times." "It's the job," Essie said. "No," said Avalsora, and the ghost of the smile, quick and careful and real, moved across her face and stayed, this time instead of leaving. "It is not only the job." She turned and walked to the transport, and did not look back, because she was Vithrani and they do not look back at arrivals. But Cadden's 4 limbs remained extended behind her as she walked, reaching backward, holding the gesture until the door of the transit bridge closed between them. Essie stood at the gate and watched the door. Around her, Fenwick and Vassal and Kethros stood in the slightly awkward configuration of people who have been part of something, and are not quite ready to stop being in it. The food cart by the east gate opened for the morning shift, the vendor lifting the canopy and setting out the spiral holders with the particular efficiency of someone who knows this motion by heart. In the upper gantry, 2 engineers were starting a shift, and one of them was already making the kind of hand gesture that means "I'll explain this," and the other was already making the kind of expression that means "you'd better." Small human life, undramatic and ordinary and ongoing. Essie breathed it in. She thought about what Cadden had said about humans, that they collect the small moments, build something out of them, keep them. That he hadn't seen another species do that. That he found it very strange and very good. She thought about a small royal child alone in a palace infirmary, being asked by a frightened dimensional entity whether it could stay, and saying yes. Not because a protocol required it, not because it served a political function, not because an official form specified the answer. Just because someone small and far from home was asking, and she understood what asking cost. Essie turned from the gate and walked back through the atrium, past the food cart and the overhead cargo drone making its maintenance pass, and the morning shift streaming in through the main entrance in 1s and 2s, bringing the smell of transit with them. recycled air and distant starport fuel, and something that was just the specific scent of in-between places where things pass through on their way to somewhere else. She passed the northern wall. She stopped, as she sometimes did, and looked at the mural. All those figures, species from a dozen star systems, reaching toward a common point of light they hadn't gotten to yet. Arms and appendages and manipulators all extended in the same direction, without quite touching the center. The artist had painted every one of them differently, different postures, different expressions, different ways of reaching, but she'd kept one thing constant across all of them. None of them were reaching alone. Essie stood there for a moment in the morning foot traffic, surrounded by the noise and the imprecision, by the ongoing ordinary life of a transit hub at the edge of everything, and she thought, yeah, that's it, that's the whole thing. She went to start her shift.